When we started writing our thoughts down on paper, it opened up endless possibilities. Ideas could grow beyond the borders of the mind, and it changed the world. Somewhere along the way, we lost touch with paper, distracted by devices made for every purpose except for thinking and focus. On edge, waiting for the next notification. But what if new technology didn't pull us away from paper, but brought us closer to it? Listen. That's not paper. It's the sound of the new Remarkable Paper Pro, rewriting the future. A paper tablet with a true color ink display, gentle reading light, and unheard of tactility. With digital features for taking notes, thinking, and organizing, without any distractions. Paper is about to change the world again. Get your paper tablet at remarkable.com today.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Vikki Heywood, author of a new novel, Miss Veal and Miss Ham, a story of kind of repressed passions and loves in post-war Great Britain, of gay life that could not possibly have articulated and spoken its name at the time and be seen, and about how that world is kind of examined through the course of one day. So anyway, I'm not going to say much about the book. That's for Vikki to do. But firstly, welcome, Vikki. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, super. So I think this is a really, really interesting topical time to look at, and I you know, to my kind of regret, I don't look at queer history enough when it comes to the podcast. But I'm always been fascinated by the idea of people, by necessity, often having to have secret inner lives during times where we imagine everybody is conforming to some sort of mainstream. And then there is this kind of false assumption, isn't there? You reach a moment in British social history when suddenly people can be out and imagine that, oh, gay people didn't exist before then. How remarkable. Why did everyone start doing this now? And of course, that's not the case at all. But firstly, tell us about the book. Tell us about the story.
Well, I wanted to write a story about love in old age, and about a love that might not be able to, be fully and publicly realized, but was very wonderfully private, and was to in many respects, in a happy and loving relationship, which I think was the case for a lot of lesbian women through the 20s and up until perhaps beginning to change through the 1960s. Yeah. But certainly through my education, I was born in 1956, so I'm 69 now, and through my education and also through many of my friends, we were certainly taught by Miss This and Miss That, and openly or privately recognized, but never openly acknowledged the truth of their lives. So I wanted to write that story really about
Yeah.
what it was like for those women, and the particular lens that or pressure, or jeopardy that I put them into is the other historical truth, which is that the call up in the First World War for women to support the war effort, which then went through into the Second World War, did provide women, and particularly gay women, with the sort of occupations that might help them to live those private lives. And
Okay.
so my characters answer a call in 1917 to go and run a small village sub post office and sweet shop, which of course provided accommodation as well as employment. And
Right.
they've stayed there for 35 years. Um, and that is also sort of very historically true, that lesbian women tended to explain their what might be perceived lack of contribution to
Mm.
society by not getting married and having children, by becoming teachers, by becoming nurses, by becoming sub-post mistresses. So that
Yeah.
was the environment in which I placed this story.
And tell me about the research. What did you need to look at in order to find the kind of the material to work with here? Was
Well, I
there
should say straight off the bat that, of course, a lot of authors' research is their lived experience. And Miss Veal and Miss Ham actually existed in the late 1800s. I have no idea whether they were um, public companions and private lovers, but they ran the grocer's shop in my parents' village. In fact, my parents' house was the grocer's shop. And their names, which were told to me by my mother, just completely stuck in my head as a writer. I thought they're just too good to lose.
yeah.
Um, and in fact, very strangely, the day before the book launch, a friend of mine who has now at my mother's house in this very small village in Cornwall found Miss Veal's hymn book in the chapel next door, having been signed by her, which is a bit of a strange thing to happen, isn't it? That's what really reaching
Wow.
out from the grave. So Miss Veal and Miss Ham were real. And as I said before, several of my teachers were real, living these private lives, including my headmistress at my school, St. Christopher's, who was a woman called Rosemary Manning, who was also a novelist.
Hmm.
Wrote The Chinese Garden, which is considered a sort of a seminal sapphic novel, but also wrote children's stories, Dragon series, which I read when I was young and at school, which is quite strange to have a headmistress who's also writing children's stories that you're reading.
Yeah.
And Rosemary finally came out on national television at the age of 70.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and she struggled in her life with the privacy of her private life, and indeed it caused her at one point to attempt to commit suicide. So she was
Right.
someone who really struggled with the fact that she could not live this open life that she desired. So that was another impetus for me about wanting to write it. And then lastly, I think my research, this sort of story sort of fell into my lap in that I in our village, we had a tiny little sweet shop and post office run by the tiny Mrs. Johns, who was quite a character and ran separate hours for the shop and the post office, even though it was in the size of a room that was a postage stamp per converted front room. And
Hmm.
so when I was thinking about a small community world where, it was hard, particularly hard for people to reveal their true selves, I thought about a small village with a post office and sweet shop, and then discovered this truth of the fact that a lot of women signed up to be sub-post office mistresses in the First World War, and it
Right.
all seemed to suddenly come together. And then this other extraordinary piece of factual information that I found out that in 1947, a lot of them were let go. And because they were on temporary contracts, they didn't have pensions, they didn't have anything.
Right.
And a lot of them lost their accommodation as well.
So they were practically destitute in
Thousands of women were let go in 1947 as part of a restructuring after the war. And yeah, if you've got a particular problem, haven't you? If you're
yeah.
two ladies who live a private life together and now cannot possibly afford to be anywhere else apart from relying on the kindness of other people who might not want to take you on under those circumstances. So those were the bits of research that came together that underpinned the story that I thought I'd imagined writing.
Did you get a sense with particularly with lesbian relationships that these things are often kind of open secrets? Everyone sort of knows, but nobody really names it.
Yes, I wonder, and I've been talking to various of my lesbian friends about this as to why that was the case, and to some extent is still sometimes the case. And it seems to be a mixture of things. It's partly the fact that because it was never illegal, it kind of wasn't recognized.
Yeah.
I think women who were together, particularly in social situations, apart from the explanation during the wars that men weren't around.
Mhm.
But, I can remember a time even, when I started going into pubs in the 1970s, there was the public men's bar only and the saloon bar where some ladies might sit, but two women sitting alone drinking was always regarded effectively as being either prostitutes or on the make, looking for a bloke. And so not being pestered, being left alone, or being actually thrown out, I think caused women to particularly socialize away from those public places and to kind of work through their networks of relationships privately rather than in such a public way. But
Yeah.
it's interesting in my research that a couple of writers writing about this particular time of lesbian history say this isn't really a subject that's been particularly addressed.
No.
Why women did feel the necessity to be quite so private.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I suppose other than women are always even to the present day in a more disadvantageous in terms of kind of power relations point in society,
Yeah.
and how much solidarity there would have been as an out gay woman from straight women is it's quite a gamble, isn't it?
Yes, I think that's right. And financially, it's true that you are adversely affected. And of course, for my characters who were, and they make a very strong point of saying this, suffragists and not suffragettes,
Hmm.
which we can talk about in a minute. But when you think of the fact that when they met in 1917, campaigning as they were for women's rights, they didn't have them. And in truth, women under 30 didn't really have them until 1928. And in truth, unmarried women didn't really have them until after 1928. So for a lot of that period of time, women didn't have an ability to speak out or lobby their MPs or be particularly represented. And I think that added to a sense that some women had, that they were not my characters, Dora and Beatrix, who were quite politically active, but for quite a lot of women, I think they felt that keeping things quiet and not being particularly active was probably the best way to live your best life.
Obviously, for gay men, 1967 is the kind of the year in which gay sex is decriminalised. It's not necessarily legalised, decriminalised. But there is, because gay relationships and gay sex wasn't criminalised for gay women, but it's suppressed, shall we say, as we've just discussed. Is there I just wonder if there's a kind of an equivalent moment in kind of gay history, in female gay history?
Being allowed to get married.
Right.
That is the big turning point.
So that's like now.
Exactly. This is the big moment for women to be able to publicly state their love, I think, which is later. And that created some challenges, I think, between homosexual men and lesbian women in terms of what to politically campaign for.
Yeah.
But I think that for my lesbian friends, that's the moment of of real change, I think, for them, the before and after that.
And it seems like as well, the other theme in the story is about aging as well. It's not just about same-sex relationships, but it's about older people and the passage of time as well. And
yes, that was, as I say, really important for me. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you carry on. You carry on.
I was just going to say, I that was very important for me, and I want this to be a universal story. These two ladies, happen to be lesbians, but the story that I'm telling about the isolation of old age and the prejudices around old age are true to anyone. And indeed, there were many women who were not lesbians who were sub post office mistresses who lost their jobs and were destitute as a result. So yes, love is always a universal story, isn't it? I wanted it to
You know how every team has that one clutch player who just knows how to come through in the big moments? For your finance game, that's Experian, your BFF. And by that, I mean big financial friend. Experian could help you save, lets you check your FICO score, and matches you with credit cards. Just download the Experian app and get started for free. Trust me, with this BFF on your roster, your finance game has never been stronger. Based on FICO Score 8 model. Offers and approval not guaranteed. Terms apply. Offers not available in all states. See Experian.com for details.
Mission success doesn't come from PowerPoint slides. It comes from rock-solid technology systems that you can depend on when everything's on the line. From enabling warfighters at the edge to deploying AI to secure national intelligence, we're there, delivering the tech that runs faster and hits harder. GDIT, for everywhere the mission goes, and failure's not an option. Learn how we deliver technology for America's critical advantage at gdit.com.
To be a celebration of that, to be a celebration of what it's like to be in a relationship that's been going for 47 years, and what that brings, the depth that brings, and I hope that comes through in the dialogue and the scenes between them, the humour and the subtext, the things you don't know, you no longer need to say. I loved celebrating that when I was writing this.
Yeah. And without obviously the spoiler alerts ahead, folks, but there are, but what are the kind of the challenges that the characters face? Are there that obviously?
The day starts with the biggest challenge of all, which is that this is their last day in the shop. Mm-hmm. They've overslept. The newspaper boy, William, is banging on the door. Dora took 2 sleeping pills because she didn't think she was going to sleep a wink all night. Beatrix is strung out, being the one that has to cope and sort out all their challenges through their relationship. And the stage is set for what is going to happen during that final day. The bailiffs are arriving tomorrow. And quite quickly, their non-sympathetic, nasty landlord, Terry, turns up to collect the keys. So it all takes place over about 12 hours. Yeah. Quite a lot happens in that 12 hours. And the end is not perhaps quite what you would expect, but it's they are absolutely on a precipice. They've run out of road.
I think, again, stepping away from the question of age or sexuality, another key thing that strikes me, and I had heard about this in different aspects about war women being quote unquote demobilized, or civilian war workers being demobilized, and it was just meant in many cases women being turfed out of their jobs to make way for their men coming home. But the callousness of it, the cruelty of it, Britain, the victorious side in the war, returns to a kind of, and this often happens at the end of wars, societies trying to kind of reset. And you can look at this in Britain, you can see it in America, you can see it in lots of places. Social revolutions have happened during the war, and people aren't always going to go back into the box. And this is really with Miss Veal and Miss Hamlet's they are the victims of the reset, aren't they?
They are, and that time, it's set a week before Churchill beats Attlee again. We feel rather familiar circumstances. It's only been 18 months since the previous election. Someone
Yeah.
comes to the shop and says, "Oh God, another one." The society's in quite a lot of churn. It's only just created the National Health Service. There's a nascent welfare state, but there isn't really a net to catch you if you fall through.
No.
And I wanted to set it at that moment really when society was changing a lot. Dora refers to going into a poorhouse, and Beatrix says, "Well, there aren't poorhouses anymore, but." The old people's homes were converted from them, so they weren't kind of that far apart in those days, and pensions were tiny if you didn't have any pension from your job. So there were more holes for people, I think, to slip through and get lost, and it was an extraordinary time for women because yes, they were advertised, the advertisements running, telling you to get back to being the mother, being the supporter, creating the home for the man. I remember when as I say, a 56 baby, but I can remember my first picture book was all about me and my mummy, and we put on our pinnies and we would be cleaning the house and sorting everything out for daddy who was going to come home, and we would get his newspaper and his slippers and give him his pipe. And that's the world that women were being actively encouraged to be in, to dress in this sort of 1950s way, to some extent be emancipated. But the emancipation was really all about being at home and being a housewife and making babies potentially for another war that was going to come along, because after all, we didn't know that was really the end of those two, so we needed to brutally replenish the stocks. So that was, I wanted to, be in that moment really, where they were very much of an older world that was different.
Well, that world, the one you describe of domesticity and family life, this is a very consciously created thing. I think David Kynaston's his second book, Family Britain, which is 51 to 56, I think.
Yes.
He writes about it's kind of a hegemon, it's sort of very kind of socially and culturally hegemonic kind of idea about the return to the nuclear family after the upheavals of war and austerity and all these sorts of things. But it's manufactured, and it's manufactured because of governments looking at, as you say, looking ahead at Cold War priorities, and that the point of men and women is to make babies, and it's the sort of thing that there's a kind of this left critique of the family under capitalism, which is it's just to make babies, workers and soldiers, isn't it? And in the 1950s, the government were going, yes, it is.
Yes.
And
yes.
And two gay spinsters don't really fit into that world, really.
No, and neither do people who are kind of happy to live with an outside loo and a much more austere kind of warlike existence, with their hens and their kitchen gardens and their all of that, which was also disappearing, with my grandparents, and when I used to look at the lives that they lived, very, very different from how we were living, mum and dad in our sort of nuclear family. It was a time of enormous social change, and yet I think the morals of the time were also quite looking backwards in a way. Churchill came in with quite a view about family life and all the rest of it, and it was about knuckling down. It was still having rationing. It had to be brought back because, as my mother remembered, everyone behaved so badly, as she said, and so rationing was brought back in terms of sweets and various things. And it was I like moments where my next book is set in Bolton, just a tiny bit later, but it's about really the collapse of the cotton industry. And I like setting my books in a period of history where there's a lot going on.
There was, I mean, you can look in accounts of the 1960s even, and there are things in there where there are the last vestiges of the Victorian world are still there. The way particularly very poor people lived.
Yes.
And the way working class communities lived. And, you know, and this is the 1970s, one of my earliest recollections, this is in sort of the leafy suburbs of mid Cheshire. Was the horse-drawn rag and bone man coming around. And it's just this stuff that you think, how is that still here? I
used to have nightmares when I was little about the horse-drawn rag and bone man that used to come down our street. Absolute nightmares. Yeah, he was a huge mythic figure in my head. Absolutely. And my grandmother was a Bolton mill owner, lived on the Chorley Road, and had a cook and two maids, you know, in the 1960s and early 1970s. So those two changing worlds, where one lot were having, you know, new baths all those Victorian baths being ripped out and those new sort of lozenges of pink and green put in, and their twin tubs, and then this the two worlds of still the back-to-back houses and the outside levies and all the rest of it, and that lovely Eisel blue paper, and then, you know, my granny up the road with her chauffeur.
And I mean, I love stories where you're looking at older people who are, you know, maybe coming to the final phase of their life, because particularly when set in the 20th century, where so much has happened, it's like you're looking at time travelers. And who have lived through these extraordinary transitions, but they themselves internally are, to some extent, the people they once were. You know, changed a little, but stayed, you know, quite consistent. And I think there's so much great opportunity, particularly in fiction, to examine, you know, the falling away of an old world and the growth of a new one.
And I see that particularly as a writer through language and the way people speak. I like writing characters who actually speak in a way that was how my parents spoke when they were young, and my grandmother spoke, and my grandfather on the other side, who worked in the bank. There was a kind of generosity of language, the way people use language. So obviously changing massively now as we move into, you know, texting and short words, and maybe spelling doesn't matter anymore, and all of those things. I love that period, the way people spoke in the 1940s and 1950s. I find it very attractive, and love listening to old recordings. The Lancashire accent is wonderful to listen to those recordings of the mill workers in the 40s and 50s, and that's not to romanticize their lives, because they were very tough, but there is something that I want to relish and celebrate in the older ways of speaking that I like to address through my novels. Yes.
There was a great, I don't know if you've read, Juliet Gardner wrote this amazing, it's like a doorstep book, this amazing history of the 1930s. And in it, one of the final chapters is all about working class life and sexuality and working class life. And she writes about how the prevalence of gay men in like the East End of London, with the kind of the knowledge that of gay male encounters was sort of new, I think, is the point she's making, because in these little terrace communities, everybody knows everybody else's business, and there is a kind of because everyone knows everybody else's business, there's a kind of a general sense of, well, that bit of business, is there any point in kind of making anything of it, because it'll just cause all sorts of chaos? And I remember, my family history. This is something I only pointed out to my mum, who's like 82 this year. I only pointed this out to her a couple of years ago. We used to have an Uncle Bill in Anglesey, my family are from the northwest. And Uncle Bill went to live off in Anglesey with another man and lived there happily in one cottage. And there was one bedroom, as far as I can recall, doing oil paintings for about 40 odd years until he died. And I said to my mum, well, don't you think, Uncle Bill, 2 guys, 1 house, 1 bedroom? I mean, and I genuinely think for the majority of my family, that hadn't really occurred to them. And my theory on that one is that perhaps the generation I've grown up in is more kind of embedded in discourses around sexuality. Or my family are just exceptionally unobservant. I don't know, but
no, I think your family are the norm. My uncle was gay, lived with his partner Keith in Hampstead, and I don't think that was discussed until I was probably in my 40s. And I think that was because he'd written a book about it. And so Mum felt, she had to talk about it. And even in the most liberal of families, they slept in separate rooms when they came and stayed with us, which was interesting. I think this is the challenge for remains a challenge sometimes for quite a few homosexual people. But that in one respect, it is good that it is just normalized and not noticed, but in another element, it is not respected and celebrated. And so it becomes this thing we don't talk about. And I do think those generations, of course, didn't talk about lots of things. They didn't talk about war trauma. They didn't talk about, there were huge parts of their lives they didn't talk about. And this was just another one that was left over there, including, of course, children who were being born, my husband's family, he only discovered quite recently that his Uncle Mel was actually his cousin. Long after all parties have gone. But his aunt went off into service at the age of 14, came home pregnant, and Granny brought the baby up as her own. Very normalized, abnormal behaviour that ran through that generation easily. And I think it all forms part of, you're right, that social pressure.
So let's talk a bit about the book. When is it pre-release at the moment or available?
No, it's published. It's out. It was published on the 3rd of July. We had a great party at the National Theatre, which very, very kindly, the bookshop there, because of my theatrical heritage and background, they were keen to take in. So it's available there, and I understand in Waterstones and on Amazon and everything. So yes, as a first-time debut novelist, I'm now wondering how on earth this all works, and watching in amazement as my publishers, Muswell Press, sort of juggle and balance it all. It's very exciting, and I'm delighted that it's happened. Yeah, I'm out. It's out.
It would be, not wanting to rush time ahead, but if you want to come back and talk about the decline of Lancashire cotton mills, I'd be all up for that. As we always say on the podcast, if you can buy the book from an independent bookstore, please do. If you can't, go directly to the publisher, get it from them, because this is the ecosystem that we are currently torching, as if it were some delicate rainforest.
Yes, I agree.
Bookstores and little publishers, once they are gone, they are not coming back, guys. So give them your money, give them your love.
Exactly right. Just like sub-post offices.
Absolutely, just like sub-post offices. So, Vikki, it was a delight to talk to you today. It really was. I wish you all the very best with the book. It sounds like it's going to be a fantastic read. And I'll post a link to it in the show notes down below. All it remains to be said is do come back, and it was just a wonderful chat today about this aspect of our shared history that we should say more about.
Lovely. Thank you very much for having me, Nick.
Take good care.
Federal missions demand efficiency. At GDIT, efficiency means streamlining government operations, automating citizen services, and saving the government over $1 billion a year detecting and preventing fraud. We bring proven AI, cloud, and software development solutions to the forefront of driving efficiencies, delivering savings of up to 40%. Because at GDIT, efficiency isn't just possible, it's built in. Learn more at gdit.com.